The market was alive with strange colors and stranger faces. Tall creatures with scales bargained for glowing fruits. Short, round beings rolled barrels of crystal water, and the air was filled with the smell of spices Daniel could not name. Daniel. Walker, a human engineer from Earth, moved carefully through the crowd. He kept his head down, avoiding eye contact. Humans were rare here. Too rare. He had arrived in this world by accident, a miscalculation in an experimental portal device back at his lab. Now, stuck in this alien city called Virel, his goal was simple: survive until he could find a way back home. But survival was tricky when everyone stared at you like you were a walking treasure chest. Some looked curious, others greedy. A sudden shadow fell over him. Daniel looked up to see a young, beautiful alien woman blocking his path. She had soft, natural beauty, tall, pointed ears twitching, and a long, sleek tail that swayed lazily. Her golden eyes studied him like a cat watching a mouse. "You're human," she said, her voice low and calm. Daniel swallowed. "Yes. And you are?" "Lyra," she replied. "And you're in danger." Before he could ask what she meant, she reached into a nearby stall and pulled out something, a thin collar with a silver clasp and a long leather strap. She tossed a few silver coins to the merchant without breaking eye contact with Daniel. "What are you—" Daniel started, but his words were cut off as she stepped forward and, in one quick motion, fastened the collar around his neck. "Now, you're mine," she said, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Daniel blinked. "Excuse me?" Lyra gave the leash a small tug, motioning for him to follow. "In this city, no one bothers another person's pet. You walk alone, you're prey. You walk with me, you're under my protection." Daniel frowned. "So, you're pretending I'm your pet?" "Exactly," she said with a faint smile. "You'll thank me later." Daniel's pride wanted to resist, but his survival instincts reminded him that she might be right. The stares from the crowd had already changed. Instead of seeing him as an unclaimed outsider, they now saw him as belonging to someone. That seemed to make them lose interest. As they walked, Daniel's eyes kept moving, scanning the alien marketplace. He noticed mechanical carts shaped like insects carrying heavy loads, vendors selling tiny glowing spheres, and a group of armored guards watching the streets from above. Every detail mattered. If he wanted to escape this world, he needed to learn how it worked. "You're not from here, are you?" Lyra asked as they passed a stall selling blue feathery fruits. "Not even close," Daniel replied. "Thought so," she said. "You walk like you don't know who's dangerous and who's not." "And you?" Daniel asked. "Why help me? What's in it for you?" Lyra's golden eyes glinted. "Maybe I just like collecting rare things." Daniel sighed. "Great. I'm a rare thing now." Lyra didn't answer, but her tail flicked in amusement. They stopped at a high balcony overlooking the city. From here, Daniel could see the sprawling chaos of Virel, twisting streets, layered bridges, and glowing towers that seemed to hum with power. Far in the distance, a massive structure rose like a claw into the sky, its black metal surface reflecting the pale green sun. "That's the core tower," Lyra said, following his gaze. "The oldest building here. Some say it's not even from this world." Daniel's mind immediately sparked with curiosity. "Technology?" "Ancient technology," she replied. "But guarded. No one enters without the Council's permission." Daniel stored the information away. If the core tower had advanced tech, maybe it had something that could help him get home. They moved again, winding through narrow alleys where the air smelled of oil and dust. Here the crowd was rougher. Beings with sharp teeth and hungry eyes watched them. One stepped forward, a tall figure with fur-covered arms and hooked claws. "Nice pet," the stranger said to Lyra, his voice mocking. Sell him to me. I'll give you double whatever you paid. Daniel felt the tension in the leash as Lyra stepped between him and the stranger. Not for sale. The furred alien's grin widened. Everything's for sale. Daniel took a small step forward, his voice calm but cutting. You might want to step back. Where I'm from, the last guy who touched me without asking didn't end up with his fingers. The alien blinked, clearly not expecting a pet to speak, let alone threaten him. Lyra's ears twitched in surprise, but she smirked. The stranger muttered something in a language Daniel didn't know, then backed away into the shadows. As they walked on, Lyra glanced at Daniel. You talk too much for a pet. Maybe I'm a different breed, Daniel said. She laughed softly, a sound like chimes. Eventually, they reached a quieter street lined with tall buildings covered in climbing plants. Lyra stopped at a small door and led Daniel inside. The room beyond was simple. Cushions on the floor, shelves with strange tools, and a window looking out over the city. This is my place, Lyra said. You'll stay here until I decide it's safe for you to walk alone. Daniel crossed his arms. I'm not planning to be anyone's pet forever. Good, Lyra replied, setting the leash down on the table. I don't keep pets forever. I keep allies. Daniel raised an eyebrow. Ally? Thought I was a collectible. Her golden eyes softened just slightly. Maybe you're both. Daniel didn't know whether to trust her yet. But one thing was certain. In this strange world, walking alone might mean not walking at all. For now, the leash stayed on, but in his mind he was already planning how to take it off, and maybe one day hand it back to her in return. Daniel woke up to the sound of soft bells ringing outside. The morning light in Virel was different, a pale green glow from the alien sun that made the city look like a painting. From the window of Lyra's home, he could see narrow bridges, connecting rooftops and airships drifting slowly above the skyline. Lyra was already awake, sitting on a cushion with her tail curling lazily around her legs. She was eating something that looked like a cross between bread and coral. You're awake, she said. Good, we have things to do. Daniel rubbed his eyes. Like what? More walking around pretending I'm a house cat? Her ears twitched. If you want to survive here, you need to understand how this world works. Today, I'll teach you the rules. He muttered something under his breath, but followed her out the door. The collar was still around his neck, though the leash was coiled loosely in her hand. Daniel decided not to fight it. Not yet. The streets were busier than yesterday. Merchants shouted in strange accents, holding up exotic goods. The smell of roasted meat mixed with the scent of sweet fruit. Strange creatures, some walking on 2 legs, others on 4, moved through the crowd. Lyra led Daniel to an open square where dozens of beings were gathered around a central stage. This is the trade court, she explained. Disputes are settled. Here. If someone steals from you, you bring them here. If someone breaks a deal, you bring them here. Daniel watched as 2 traders argued in front of a robed judge. One slammed a box of glowing stones onto the table, shouting. The other responded with a hiss, waving a contract written on thin sheets of metal. It's all about appearances, Lyra continued. If you look weak, you'll lose, even if you're right. Daniel smirked. So confidence is a currency. Here? She gave him a sidelong glance. Exactly. That's why the leash works. It tells others you belong to someone strong. Daniel wasn't sure if he liked that logic, but he couldn't deny it made sense. From the trade court, Lyra led him to a narrow alley filled with signs in alien writing. This is the knowledge row, she said. If you need maps, translators, or information, you come here. Daniel's interest sharpened. Information like about the core tower? Her tail flicked. Maybe, but information here is expensive, sometimes more expensive than gold. They stopped at a shop filled with mechanical devices, clocks that ticked without gears, glowing crystals in glass containers, and strange lenses that made the air ripple when you looked through them. An old alien with 4 eyes and long, thin fingers looked up from behind the counter. "Lyra," he said, his voice like dry paper. "And what's this?" He gestured at Daniel. "My pet," Lyra said smoothly. "He's curious about the old world." Daniel's jaw tightened, but he stayed silent, deciding to play along. The shopkeeper studied him for a long moment. "Old world knowledge is dangerous," he said, "but sometimes useful." He handed Daniel a small metal disc with strange markings. "This is a key map. It shows paths under the city. Some lead to places forgotten. Others lead to death. Choose wisely." Daniel slipped it into his pocket. "Thanks." The shopkeeper narrowed his eyes. "Your pet speaks well. Keep him safe, Lyra. There are those who would take him." "I know," she said quietly. They walked on, Daniel glancing at the map when Lyra wasn't looking. The markings were complex, but one symbol caught his attention. A tall spire that looked just like the core tower. "You didn't tell me there are tunnels?" "Leading to the tower," Daniel said casually. Lyra didn't answer right away. Her ears twitched, but she kept walking. "Because those tunnels are guarded by more than walls. Old machines still move down there, and they don't care who they kill." Daniel's mind was already racing. Machines meant technology. Technology might mean a way home. They stopped at a small food stall where a vendor handed Lyra skewers of grilled meat. She passed one to Daniel. The taste was smoky, with a hint of something like lemon. As they ate, Daniel noticed a group of armored feline guards passing by. Their armor shimmered like polished obsidian, and each carried a long spear tipped with glowing blue light. "Who are they?" Daniel asked. "Clan guards," Lyra said. "They answer to the noble families. If one of them marks you as a target, you won't live to see the next sun." Daniel thought about the rival feline from yesterday. "So if someone wanted me, they'd use them?" "Probably," she said. "That's why you stay close." Later, as they crossed another crowded street, a loud voice rang out. "There's the human!" Daniel froze. A tall feline male in expensive robes was standing a few paces away, surrounded by his own guards. His golden eyes were colder than Lyra's, and his tail lashed like an angry whip. "That's the rival I told you about," Lyra muttered under her breath. The noble stepped forward. "Lyra, sell him to me. I'll give you 10 times what you paid." Lyra's voice was calm. "Not for sale," the noble smiled thinly. "Everything is for sale, even loyalty." Daniel took a step forward before Lyra could stop him. "Funny," he said, his tone sharp. "Where I come from, people who can't earn respect try to buy it instead." The noble's expression darkened. The crowd murmured. A pet speaking so boldly was unheard of. "This will not be forgotten," the noble said, turning away with a flick of his tail. When they were alone again, Lyra gave Daniel a long look. "You just made an enemy who has more power than you can imagine." Daniel smiled faintly. "Then I'll just have to be smarter than he can imagine." Her lips curved into a small, reluctant smile. "You might just survive here after all." That night, back in Lyra's home, Daniel sat by the window, looking at the city lights. He pulled out the metal disc the shopkeeper had given him, tracing the path that led to the core tower. Lyra noticed but said nothing. Daniel didn't know when or how, but he was going to reach that tower. And when he did, maybe the leash would come off. For good. The next morning, Daniel woke to the sound of rain tapping softly against the window. The city of Virel looked different under the pale green sky, its rooftops shimmering from the water. The streets were quieter, but Daniel had the strange feeling that something was moving under the surface, like the calm before a storm. Lyra stood near the table, adjusting the strap of a small bag over her shoulder. Her ears twitched as she looked out the window. "We'll have company today," she said. Daniel frowned. "What do you mean?" "I mean the noble from yesterday won't let it go. He's not used to being insulted, especially not by someone wearing a collar." Daniel smirked. "Guess I made an impression." Lyra gave him a sharp look. "An impression that can get you killed." They left the house, walking through the misty streets. The leash hung loosely between them, but Daniel noticed that Lyra kept glancing over her shoulder, more than usual. The marketplace was half empty, the vendors' stalls covered with rainproof cloth. The smell of wet stone filled the air. Daniel scanned the crowd, his instincts telling him they were being watched. Sure enough, as they passed a row of closed shops, a group of feline figures stepped out from an alley. Their armor was dark, their eyes fixed on him. "Lyra," the leader said, his voice cold, "the noble requests your presence, and his property." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Property?" Lyra's tail flicked in annoyance. "He's not your property, and I'm not coming." The leader's eyes narrowed. "Then we take him by force." The guards moved forward. Lyra dropped the leash and stepped in front of Daniel, her claws sliding out with a quiet click. Daniel's brain was already working. 4 guards, narrow street, wet ground. They had reach with their weapons, but the space was tight. If he could disrupt their balance. "Lyra, left side!" Daniel shouted. She didn't question him. She lunged at the nearest guard while Daniel grabbed a loose crate from the side of the street and shoved it hard toward the other 2. The crate hit the wet cobblestones, breaking apart and spilling metal spheres. The guards' feet slipped on the rolling pieces, their balance thrown off. Lyra struck fast, her tail whipping behind her for balance as she knocked one down. The leader snarled, stepping toward Daniel. "You're brave for a pet." Daniel looked him straight in the eye. "I'm not brave. I'm just better at thinking than you." The leader swung his weapon, but Daniel ducked, grabbing a length of chain from the ground and snapping it upward. The chain wrapped around the guard's arm, pulling him off balance just long enough for Lyra to land a decisive strike. The guards retreated, their leader glaring back. "This isn't over." When the street was clear, Lyra turned to Daniel. Her golden eyes were bright with both anger and something else, maybe surprise. "You planned that." Daniel shrugged. "Improvised. Planning would have been cleaner." "You're not like the others I've seen," she said quietly. "Most would have frozen." Daniel's voice was calm. "Where I'm from, freezing gets you hurt. Thinking gets you out alive." They kept moving, avoiding the main streets. Eventually, Lyra led him to a tall building made of black stone. The windows glowed faintly from within. "This is a safe hall," she said. "Neutral ground. Even the nobles won't break the rules here." Inside, the air was warm and smelled, faintly of herbs. People from many different species sat at low tables, trading goods and information. No one paid much attention to Daniel, which was exactly what he wanted. Lyra found a quiet corner. "We need to talk," she said. Daniel leaned back. "About the noble?" "Yes. He won't stop until he gets you. And if he learns you're looking into the core tower..." She trailed off, her ears twitching. Daniel smiled faintly. "Then we'd better make sure we get there first." Lyra's eyes narrowed. "You're serious?" "Very," Daniel said. "If the tower has technology from the old world, it might be my only way home. But even if it doesn't, something tells me it's at the center of everything here." Lyra studied him for a long moment. "You're not just trying to survive. You're trying to win." Daniel didn't answer directly. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out the metal disc map. "There's a tunnel entrance marked here. If we can find it, maybe we can get into the tower without the council's permission." Lyra sighed, but there was a hint of a smile on her lips. "Your trouble," Daniel smirked. "You picked me up." Their conversation was interrupted when a small, cloaked figure approached their table. The hood lowered, revealing a young reptilian alien with silver scales. "You're the human," the newcomer said. "I saw what happened in the street. The noble won't forgive it. But I know a way into the Undercity." Daniel and Lyra exchanged a glance. "What do you want in return?" Daniel asked. The reptilian's eyes gleamed. "Not much. Just a share of whatever you find." Lyra's tail moved slowly behind her. "And why help us?" "Because," the reptilian said, with a thin smile, "I don't like nobles either." Later, as they walked back to Lyra's home, the rain had stopped, but the air was heavy with mist. "You trust him?" Daniel asked. "No," Lyra said. "But sometimes you don't need trust. You just need matching goals." Daniel thought about that as they climbed the narrow steps to her door. He had made an enemy with power, but also gained a possible path forward. The leash still hung loosely between them, but Daniel felt something shifting. Every challenge they faced together seemed to push him closer to the day when the roles would change, when he wouldn't just be the one following. 2 days later, the city of Varel was buzzing with rumors. Whispers of a human pet who fought off the nobles' guards had spread through the markets, alleys, and tea houses. Some told the story like Daniel was a wild creature who bit his master's enemies. Others claimed he was no pet at all, but a strange kind of warrior from a far-off world. Daniel ignored the talk. His focus was on the map and the path it promised. The metal disc from the shopkeeper had been cleaned and examined carefully, and the tunnel symbol near the core tower called to him like a beacon. Lyra, however, was less eager. "We can't just walk into the Undercity without a plan," she said, tightening the strap on her bag. "Once we're down there, there's no law, no safe halls, and the things that guard those tunnels aren't normal." Daniel met her, golden eyes. "If we wait too long, your noble friend will lock the place down completely. We have to move now." Lyra sighed, flicking her tail in irritation. "You're impossible. And you're still here," Daniel said with a faint grin. The reptilian guide, whose name was Sorrow, met them at a quiet courtyard far from the main streets. He carried a small satchel and moved with quick, darting steps. "You came," he said, looking Daniel over. "Good. The less time we waste, the better." Sorrow led them through narrow back streets until the sound of the marketplace was far behind. They passed abandoned warehouses, broken bridges, and rusting machines left from a time before the city was built. Finally, they reached a wide stone arch half covered in vines. Strange markings had been carved into the walls, symbols that glowed faintly in the shadows. "This is one of the old service gates," Sorrow said. "It leads down into the Undercity. From there, you follow the old transport lines toward the tower." Lyra ran her hand along the wall. "These marks, they're from the first builders." Daniel crouched, examining a rusted control panel near the gate. "Looks like there's a locking mechanism, but it's not mechanical. It's magnetic." Sorrow tilted his head. "Magnetic?" Daniel pulled a small piece of metal from his pocket, a broken tool he had taken from a scrap pile the day before. Using it, he created a makeshift loop and brushed it along the panel's edge until he heard a faint click. The gate slid open with a grinding sound, releasing a gust of cold air from below. Lyra gave him a long look. "You just opened something that's been sealed for decades." Daniel smiled faintly. "Where I'm from, we call that Tuesday." The stairs were steep, and the air grew cooler with each step. The faint green light from above faded until they were surrounded by darkness, broken only by the glow of Sorrow's small lantern. The Undercity was nothing like the streets above. The walls were made of black metal instead of stone, and strange pipes ran along the ceilings, humming softly. The floor was dusty, but here and there were marks, large, heavy, footprints that didn't look like they belonged to any person. "What made those?" Daniel asked quietly. Sorrow's voice was low. The machines. Lyra's ears twitched. Still active? Yes, Sorrow said. The first builders left them to guard the old ways. They don't know who you are and they don't care. If you move too loud, you won't see them coming. Daniel glanced at Lyra. Sounds like a fun walk? They followed the tunnel for nearly an hour, weaving through narrow passages and old storage rooms. Daniel noticed panels along the walls that seemed to light up faintly as they passed. Sensors, maybe. He kept his mind busy, memorizing the route. At one point, they came to a collapsed section where the floor had caved in, leaving a gap over a deep shaft. The only way across was a narrow beam of metal. Sorrow crossed quickly, tail balancing his. Wait. Lyra followed with the smooth grace of a hunter. Daniel, however, moved slower, testing each step. The beam creaked under his weight, and halfway across, a loud metallic groan echoed in the shaft below. From the darkness came movement, the sound of metal scraping against metal. Faster! Lyra called. Daniel didn't need telling twice. He made it to the other side just as a long, jointed arm reached up from the shaft, claws snapping at empty air. The thing pulled itself partway into view. A massive machine shaped like an insect, its glowing red eyes scanning for movement. Before it could climb higher, Sorrow threw a bright flare down into the shaft. The machine recoiled from the light, retreating into the dark. That was one of them, Sorrow said, breathing hard. Now you see why we move quickly. After more winding paths, they reached a large chamber. In the center stood a platform of black stone, with ancient rails leading, off into the dark. At the far end was a tunnel marked with the same spire symbol from Daniel's map. That's it, Daniel said, stepping forward. Lyra caught his arm. Wait, look. From the shadows near the tunnel entrance came a low humming sound. Two tall, humanoid machines stood motionless, their eyes glowing faint blue. Guards, Sorrow whispered. They only move if you get too close. Daniel studied them for a moment. Their design was sleek, but their balance points were clear. If I can, distract one. We might be able to slip past. Lyra raised an eyebrow. And how exactly will you distract a killing machine? Daniel's grin was quick. By being more interesting than the tunnel. He stepped into the open, slowly drawing a piece of metal from his bag. With careful movements, he tapped it against a pipe, producing a sharp, rhythmic sound. The first machine's head turned toward him, scanning. Daniel kept tapping, moving sideways, pulling its attention away from the tunnel. Go, he mouthed. Lyra and Sorrow slipped past the second machine, moving quickly into the tunnel. Daniel let the sound die, then tossed the piece of metal into the far corner. The machine followed the noise, giving him just enough time to sprint past its glowing eyes and into the tunnel. When they were finally safe in the darkness ahead, Lyra looked at him with an expression Daniel couldn't quite read. You take too many risks. Daniel caught his breath. And yet, here we are. Sorrow gave a short laugh. I think I'm starting to like you, human. Daniel adjusted the strap of his bag, eyes on the faint glow at the end of the tunnel. Good, because this partnership is just getting started. The wind howled through the vast canyon, carrying with it the distant sound of rushing water far below. In the fading orange glow of the evening sun, the rope bridge stretched ahead, swaying gently, looking far too fragile to hold even a child's weight, let alone a man and a feline girl. The boards were uneven, some cracked, some missing entirely, and the ropes groaned under the strain of the breeze. Lena stood at the edge of the cliff, her tail swishing slowly behind her as she scanned the bridge with narrowed eyes. This is the only way across, she said, her voice calm but her ears slightly twitching, a sign that she was not as relaxed as she wanted to seem. Ethan stepped beside her, his boots scraping against the rough stone. Looks like a death trap, he muttered. In my world, we'd call this a lawsuit waiting to happen. She tilted her head. In this world, we call it a test. If you fall, you fail. And if you fail, the world moves on without you. Ethan gave a small huff. Comforting. The bridge was not just an obstacle. Lena had told him stories of this crossing, a place where travelers were sometimes tested by more than just the wind and weak boards. Old stories said something watched from the canyon walls, something that enjoyed making the crossing harder. Ethan suspected she was half joking, at least he hoped so. Lena walked to the first plank, placing one foot down carefully. The rope shifted, and the whole structure let out a low creak. She looked over her shoulder at him. Follow my steps. Step where I step, and don't look down. Ethan nodded, gripping the side ropes as if his life depended on them, which in truth it did. The first step was jarring. The wood dipped under his weight, and the swaying motion made his stomach twist. The two moved slowly, plank by plank. The air was cooler here, the drop below hidden in shadow, but deep enough to make Ethan's skin crawl. He kept his eyes on Lena's. Back, her tail moving with quiet balance, her ears flicking in the wind. Halfway across, the first rope snap came. It wasn't a full break, just a sharp pop that made the whole bridge jolt. Ethan froze. That was not me, right? Lena didn't answer. Her head tilted slightly, and she sniffed the air. Something's here. A sound came from above, like a rock being dislodged, and a shadow moved along the canyon wall. Ethan's grip tightened until his knuckles hurt. Please tell me that's just a bird. It's not, Lena said simply. The wind suddenly picked up, whipping the bridge harder. A second rope strand frayed with a tearing sound. Then from the shadows above, something leaped. A sleek, four-legged creature with sharp claws digging into the wooden planks ahead of them. Its fur shimmered in the fading light, dark and silver like wet stone. Bridge Guardian, Lena said, drawing the curved blade at her side. It's testing us. Ethan stared. Testing us? It's about to knock us into a canyon. The Guardian hissed, the sound almost like a whispering voice. It stepped forward, each movement deliberate, eyes glowing faintly. Lena shifted her stance, the bridge swaying under her. Stay behind me, hold the rope. Do not move unless I tell you. The creature lunged, claws raking across the planks. Lena moved with surprising speed, sidestepping and striking. The blade flashed, slicing a rope near the creature's paw, not to cut it free, but to make the Guardian lose balance. The Guardian hissed louder, leaping back, and the bridge rocked violently. Ethan's boots slipped, and for a moment his heel dangled over open air. His heart pounded so hard he could barely hear the wind. Lena pressed forward, every strike forcing the Guardian back toward the far side of the bridge. Then, with a sudden twist, she dropped low, swept her leg, and the Guardian lost its footing. It clung to the ropes for a moment before vanishing into the shadows below, leaving only the faint sound of claws scraping stone. The bridge settled slightly, though it still swayed. Lena straightened, breathing hard but steady. She turned to Ethan. Move! Now! They crossed the last section quickly, Ethan's legs trembling by the time his boots touched solid ground again. He collapsed to one knee, taking in huge gulps of air. You fought that thing on a swinging bridge over a canyon? Yes, Lena said, sheathing her blade. You didn't fall. That's good. It means you passed. Ethan let out a dry laugh. Passed what? The don't die horribly test? Her ears twitched in amusement. Something like that. As they looked back, the bridge seemed almost peaceful again, gently swaying in the evening wind. But Ethan knew better now. This world didn't just test strength. It tested nerve, balance, and the ability to move forward even when the ground wasn't steady. Lena glanced at the road ahead. Come on. The next village isn't far, but the real trial hasn't even started yet. Ethan groaned. You really have a way of making me look forward to things. She smiled faintly, tail curling as she began walking. Good. Then you'll enjoy what comes next. And with that, they disappeared into the darkening path ahead, leaving the swaying bridge and its unseen watchers behind. The morning came with a sky the color of soft silver. Thin clouds drifted lazily across the horizon, and the air was cool enough to sting the lungs when breathed in deeply. Rin stood at the edge of the alien city's great square, her tail swishing slowly behind her. She wore the travel cloak she had mended the night before, its seams holding strong despite the rough journey. Beside her, Daniel adjusted the strap of the pack slung over his shoulder. Today was the day. The council had made their decision. The humans were to leave the city, escorted by a guard patrol, and face the trial beyond the western cliffs, the trial that would decide whether they were allowed to live freely in this world. It was a test that no outsider had passed in decades. Daniel glanced sideways at Rin. You think they're trying to get rid of us? He asked quietly. She gave a small, knowing smile. They are. But that doesn't mean they'll succeed. The group began to move, boots and clawed feet tapping against the smooth white stone. The streets were lined with onlookers, feline-faced, citizens who whispered to each other, some curious, others openly hostile. Daniel tried not to meet their eyes, but he could feel their stares like a physical weight. Don't shrink, Rin murmured. They'll smell fear. Walk like you own the ground under you. Daniel straightened, forcing his steps to match hers. She didn't just walk. She flowed forward, her movements light and confident. The leash she carried looped loosely around. His wrist was mostly for appearances now. In this city, that symbol meant control, but between them, it had become something else, a wordless promise that they would protect each other. They passed through the city gates and into the wild, lands beyond. The landscape was open and rolling, with tall grass that swayed in the wind and scattered rock formations like jagged teeth. In the distance, the western cliffs rose, dark and sharp against the pale sky. What exactly is this trial? Daniel asked after a long silence. Rin's ears flicked back slightly. It changes. Sometimes it's a hunt, sometimes a puzzle, sometimes something worse. But it always measures strength, cleverness, and courage. Sounds like one of those job interviews where you can't win. Her tail flicked in amusement. Except this one eats you if you fail. They camped that night in the shadow of a tall stone arch. The alien guards kept to themselves, speaking in low voices as they lit their fires. Daniel and Rin sat apart, sharing a small meal of dried fruit and spiced grain cakes. The wind had turned colder, carrying with it the faint smell of rain. Dew. You ever miss your world? Daniel asked suddenly. Rin's eyes glimmered in the firelight. Sometimes. But if I think too much about it, I'll stumble here. I've learned to look forward, not back. She tilted her head. And you? Do you want to go home? Daniel thought about the quiet streets of his old neighborhood, the dull routine of work, the safe predictability of it all. It felt like another life, smaller, grayer. I used to. Now, I'm not sure. This world scares me. But it also makes me feel alive in a way I didn't before. Rin studied him for a long moment, then gave a slow nod. Good, because after tomorrow, your life will never be the same. The next day, they reached the cliffs. The trial site was a huge stone circle carved into the rock, its walls etched with strange symbols that glowed faintly in the shade. At the center was a massive stone door. The guards stopped and stepped back, clearly unwilling to enter. This is as far as we go, their captain said. His voice was heavy with formality. Enter and face what awaits you. Succeed, and you may walk this world freely. Fail, and you will not walk again. Daniel swallowed hard, looking at the shadowed doorway. No pressure then. Rin squeezed his arm gently. Remember, strength isn't just muscle. It's knowing where to stand when the world tries to push you down. Together, they stepped through the door. Inside, the air was cool and smelled faintly of stone dust. The light dimmed to a deep amber glow, revealing a winding corridor that led deeper into the cliff. The walls were covered in murals showing ancient battles, feline warriors and strange beasts locked in combat, humans scattered in the background. As they moved, Daniel felt a pressure building in the air, like the weight of unseen eyes watching them. The corridor opened into a vast chamber lit by shafts of pale light from holes high above. In the center stood a strange structure, a series of floating stone platforms, each one spinning slowly in the air. Beyond them was a pedestal holding a crystal sphere. "Let me guess," Daniel muttered. "We have to cross that without falling to our deaths." Rin crouched, studying the motion of the platforms. "It's not just balance. The gaps change. You'll have to move when the path lines up." They waited, watching the sequence until they understood the rhythm. Then Rin leapt, her body twisting in mid-air as she landed on the first platform. Daniel followed, his legs shaking but holding. They moved in bursts, timing each jump until they were halfway across. Then the platforms began to move faster. The wind whipped around them, and Daniel's foot slipped on a slick stone edge. He pitched forward, but Rin's hand shot out, gripping, his wrist hard. She pulled him back up, her claws scraping against the stone. "Focus!" she barked. They pushed on, hearts pounding, until at last they reached the pedestal. Rin touched the crystal sphere, and the world shifted. The stone platforms vanished, replaced by solid ground, and the glowing murals on the walls changed. Now they showed a human and a feline standing side by side, facing an army together. Daniel stared. "Does this mean we passed?" Rin's tail swayed slowly. "It means they know we're not alone." As they stepped out into the sunlight again, the alien guards watched them with unreadable expressions. But Daniel saw something new there. Not just suspicion, but a hint of respect. And in that moment, he knew the real test was still to come. The sun rose over the alien city of Virel, casting long shadows across the stone streets. Daniel stood beside Lyra at the city gates, the soft green light bathing them in an otherworldly glow. Behind them, the citizens gathered, watching with mixed feelings, some curious, some doubtful, others respectful. Today was different. Today was the day Daniel would no longer be just a pet or a curiosity. Today, he would prove that humans were more than they seemed, that even in a strange world, they could stand tall. Lyra adjusted the leash loosely around her wrist. It no longer felt like a symbol of control, but of partnership, a reminder of how far they had come together. Daniel took a deep breath. "Are you ready?" he asked. Lyra's golden eyes shone. "I'm always ready." The council chamber loomed. Ahead, its great doors etched with ancient symbols. Inside, the feline elders sat in a semicircle, their expressions serious. The air was thick with tension. Daniel stepped forward, his voice steady. "I have faced the trials. I have walked the bridges, fought the guardians, and crossed the undercity. I ask not to be your pet, but to be your ally." A murmur rippled through the chamber. One elder, his fur streaked with silver, spoke. "Humans have come before. None have passed the trial. Why should you be different?" Daniel met his gaze. "Because I am not just fighting for myself. I fight for respect, for understanding, and for a chance to build a future." Lyra stepped beside him. "He is no longer a pet. He is my equal." The elders exchanged glances. The head elder stood and raised a paw. "We will grant you this, if you can show us the strength and wisdom to protect our world." At that moment, a challenge was declared, a test of strategy and courage, a final contest before the council. Daniel and Lyra nodded, knowing this was their moment. The challenge led them to a vast arena, surrounded by towering stone pillars. The ground was uneven, scattered with strange devices humming softly. Their opponents were skilled warriors, feline nobles who sneered at Daniel, clearly doubting the human. But Daniel remembered every lesson: courage, quick thinking, and partnership. The battle began. Lyra moved with grace and power, her claws flashing, her tail balancing every step. Daniel used tools he fashioned from scraps, traps, and distractions, outsmarting their foes. Together, they turned the tide. As the final opponent fell, the crowd erupted, not with boos, but cheers. Daniel looked at Lyra, a smile breaking through. His exhaustion. "We did it," he said softly. Lyra's ears twitched. "We did." Back in the council chamber, the elders nodded their approval. The head elder approached, placing a gentle paw on Daniel's shoulder. "You have earned your place among us," he said. "Not as a pet, but as a protector." Daniel's heart swelled. He felt something he hadn't in a long time: belonging. Later, as the city celebrated, Daniel and Lyra stood together watching the stars. "You think this is the end?" Daniel asked. Lyra smiled, her eyes reflecting the constellations. "No, it's only the beginning." The leash hung forgotten on a nearby post, a symbol of a past they had outgrown. Together they faced the new world, not as master and pet, but as equals, friends and partners. And in that moment, the future was theirs.